I met Carlos and Andrea about a year ago. They were older than the people I usually associate with. They were both in their late 30s, while I was in my early 20s. For some reason, we just hit it off and became good friends. Carlos was a handsome man. He had a good job and worked hard at it. Andrea worked too, although I suspect she didn't need to since Carlos was making good money. Not having children was a disappointment to them, but otherwise they seemed to be enjoying life. Carlos was very much an extrovert, loud and boisterous. What made it even weirder was that I still liked him even though I was a bit of an introvert. Andrea was also something of an extrovert, although she wasn't as vocal about it as Carlos. What I found strange about their relationship was the following. Carlos had the heart of a lion. He would fight the wolves with his bare hands if they threatened Andrea. Andrea, on the other hand, had an inner core of pure jelly. She really hated confrontation and would quickly retreat if someone made threats, unless the confrontation was with Carlos, in which case she was ready to slap him. I was drinking coffee at the cafe where Andrea worked part-time. The cafe was hectic, so Andrea sat across from me to chat for a while. This usually meant that she talked and I listened, with listening and empathy being my strong suit. In this particular case, she was bemoaning the fact that Carlos's niece was staying with them for a couple of weeks. According to Andrea, Chloe was a lovely young girl, an 18-year-old blonde, and she was the golden girl in the sense that she was a top-notch bitch, ungrateful, and never finding a polite word for anyone. Andrea swallowed her pride for Carlos, plus this fear of confrontation. I felt for her, but it was all I could do other than tell her that maybe she should gently hint to Carlos to push his niece a little. She gave me a look like, "Are you crazy?" "Delicate hint?" she asked with complete disbelief in her voice. "All of you men are the same. You don't notice the gentle hints. You manage not to notice the obvious hints. With something like this, the only way to get a clue, despite Carlos's thick skull, is to hammer it. And then he'll just wonder if I misunderstood something his sweet little niece said." Well, she knew Carlos better than I did. I quietly changed the subject. "Carlos said he was going to trim those trees behind your house," I said, knowing those trees had been annoying her for a while. "They are very overgrown and a good haircut would do wonders for them." "Oh, yes, and just in time," she said, smiling again. "He called me wanting to borrow my chainsaw. Tell him I'll drop it off first thing tomorrow morning. Do it nicely and early. Carlos starts work at 6 and I leave for the early shift around 8. Anytime after this, you'll have to deal with Chloe and she'll probably throw that thing in the trash and forget about it." I assured Andrea that I would be there early, but I would be crazy if I was going to be there before 6 to deliver this to Carlos. I told her I'd arrive around 8, figuring that even if I was a few minutes late, she wouldn't mind waiting those few minutes. It turned out that I was there a couple of minutes before 8, nice and timely, while a full-scale battle was raging inside. The occupants of the house did not hear me ring the bell because they were too noisy themselves, so I ran to the back door and went inside. Andrea was almost pinned to the slab by this young witch who was screaming at her. Surprisingly, all the screaming and fussing came from the young vixen, whose name, I assumed, was Chloe. From what I could gather from all of Chloe's screams, she was demanding that Andrea prepare breakfast for Chloe. Andrea's weak protests that she needed to go were mercilessly ignored. If she really had to go to work, she would have left already, but she didn't. "Enough," I shouted, and my deep voice carried through the kitchen, silencing the women. Andrea came to her senses first. "Oh, Jake," she said in a happy voice, "you're here." "Indeed it is, complete with a chainsaw. I'll just get this out of the way until Carlos gets home." I reached over and placed the chainsaw on the cabinet, away from Chloe. I turned to Andrea with a smile. "Who is this loud little bitch?" I asked Andrea, smiling as her jaw dropped in shock. "Oh, this is Chloe, our niece. She will stay with us for a couple of weeks." She glanced at Chloe briefly, and then turned back to me, grabbing her purse as she did so. "Thanks for asking that, Jake. I'm sorry, but I have to go. Work, you know." With these words, she turned and ran away, happy to be leaving the scene of battle. I turned and smiled at Chloe. "Hi, Chloe. I said. I'm Jake, friend of Carlos and Andrea. I don't care who you are, she squealed. How dare you break into the house like that? Do you have no manners at all, you fucking moron? You have the nerve to call me a bitch. I raised my hand. Excuse me, but I said noisy little bitch. But I admit I could be wrong. Looks like you really want to demonstrate that you're a big bitch. How dare you? She screamed. Get out of our house immediately. Carlos' house, I pointed out. And Andrea, of course, although you wouldn't know it if you were so shamelessly rude to your mistress. I think you should know that I didn't like the way you talked to Andrea. I would say I bullied her. As if I should care what you think, she chuckled. You're just a loudmouth moron who has nothing to do with this. She smiled sweetly at me as she said this, and I must admit that it made her look charming. You're not very talkative, I said. See that hook on the ceiling? She looked at the ceiling and then back at me. She was slightly embarrassed. What? She asked. Oh, he disappeared, I said, trying to sound disappointed. That means I can't hang you on it while I whip you. Quelle pitié. In French, it means, what a shame. Oh, you think you're such a fucking smartass, don't you? No. I think I have a sense of humor. Now you. You were almost hysterical when I came in. Now she, too, was almost hysterical with rage. I decided that I had better leave before she really went crazy. I guess I better move on. I can't spend the whole day here chatting with you, no matter how fun it may be. Before I go, a subtle reminder for you to be nicer to Andrea or risk upsetting me. I know you don't want to upset me. If the stupid girl had thought, she would have immediately moved further out of my reach. But thinking seemed to be something she wasn't very good at. I took her hand and spun her around as my free hand darted around and spanked her butt. She screamed and jumped into the air, wrapping her arms around her buttocks. I can't believe you did this. You are not my father. You can't spank me. I can't. Strange. I thought I just did it. This is what happens to naughty little girls, and sometimes more. If you don't believe me, take off your pajamas and I'll give you a good spanking. There are times when you just have to keep your big mouth shut, and it turns out this was one of them. Chloe blushed quite a bit and lowered her pajama pants. Either she slept without panties, or they fell down along with her pants. Her top, well, it almost covered her crotch, but almost covered is not the same as covered. What the hell was I supposed to do now? Spank her, I think. I sat down on the kitchen chair and patted my knees, effectively inviting her to lean over. Still blushing, she slowly walked over to where I was sitting. I saw that it was torn in two. She wanted to retreat quickly and at the same time wondered what it would be like. Her lustful curiosity got the better of her. She came up to me, and after much arguing, we had sex. We pulled away from each other and she turned around and looked at me, leaning back against the table and breathing heavily. You had me without consent, she began, but I laughed. I was just sitting there, I pointed out as she blushed. I was too scared not to, she offered, sighing as I laughed. Yeah, and I guess I ripped off your pajamas? You spanked me, she said, wanting to blame me for something. Guilty. And if you misbehave, I might just have to come in and spank you again, I told her. The problem is that next time Andrea might be here and I'll have to spank you in front of her. Wouldn't that be interesting? Oddly enough, the look on her face made me think she found the idea intriguing. I wondered if she would do something to try and force the issue. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to warn Andrea. Please like and subscribe to the channel and you will never be cheated on.